Alright folks, I'm going to try to make this kind of a quick video with some editing. We got this GMC Terrain 2017 fan runs full on, temp gauge stays on cold, sensor's been replaced. I rounded out the test light, and I touched the signal wire, the yellow one, and nothing changed. I hooked the test light to positive, tested the ground on that sensor wire, the black one, and it lights up. So it has a good ground, but it appears the signal going to ground is not hitting that temp sensor. Normally when you ground them, you'll see the temp sensor swing over to hot, hear the fans kick off, but nothing. So that tells me that somewhere, let me get a light. The temp sensor on this guy lives way back under here. But if you can see, I've got the connector unplugged there, right? And that comes to this main harness and comes back up to here, and it comes to X3. X3 is that's the blue one, that's X1. This one's black. The connector underneath, if you can see, there's blue, that's 1. Black is 2. And gray is supposed to be 3. And we can tell that by looking under that's my Mitchell on demand module X3, and it tells you it's black with gray terminal position assurance. So and we come down here, pin 8 on that connector is the engine coolant temp sensor. So I'm going to pop this off, take this connector apart, get to pin 8, and then we're going to, I probably will measure for continuity in that wire, and then I'll also touch that with a ground with my test light and see if the fan kicks off and the temp sensor swings. If it does, we just have a broken wire. If it doesn't, we've got a bad engine computer. And hopefully that's not it, because that's going to be really expensive for the customer. So hopefully that's not it, but we'll just see what it is. We'll see what it is. Be sure to check out my backup channel, FrugalPrepper's Extras. Subscribe to it. You can also check out my other channel, Network Engineers Playground. It's computer and network engineering stuff. Also, you can check out my website, which runs on this server right behind me. It's FrugalPrepper.rocks. See the links in the pinned comment below. Get this loose here. Oh. Of course, they're fragile. Oh, man. These things get fragile over time. They do not want to come out. You're trying not to break it. Sometimes you just can't help it. These things get fragile over time. There we go. Now we can push this down and unlock that. There we go. And gently remove this. There we go. And we got this. And now what I'm going to do is remove this little plastic cover here. So to see exactly what we have to do to get that loose. So I can get through the wires. So I have to be very, very gentle. Okay, so that's off. And so now we're looking for a yellow wire. It's gonna be towards the end. I think it's this one right here. but I will look at my all data at the connector diagram and see where pin 8 would be. 1 through 16, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. About halfway down on this side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Should be a yellow right there. There's our yellow. And it's actually the first one on that side. It starts at pin 8, which that makes sense because we come down here and look. Pin 1 through 7 is not occupied. So it's this one right here that we're going to go after. So I'm going to get a wire piercing probe and stick on that guy. Alright, so I've got my wire piercing probe all hooked onto that wire. Right, so now what I'm going to do is ground that guy through a test light. I always like to work through test lights. Helps keep you from blowing computers. And we're going to go ahead and start this guy up. I'm going to have to open the garage door a little bit, but we'll start this guy up and see if we can make the fans go out. That's interesting. We got no. Duh. I gotta plug the connector back into the computer so that it can actually read. It doesn't actually run. There we go. Let me move my laptop. I'm without my Lenovo laptop right now, so I'm using the MacBook because my Lenovo's back at Lenovo getting fixed. It just decided to die on me. So we hear the fans running. And we got no fan control. That's not good. That's not what I was hoping for. That's not good at all. It means that driver's blown in the computer. We don't just automatically call a computer. We gotta do some board diagnosis to make sure it's a computer. But it's looking like it's a computer. That's a high-speed fan. And this is a low-speed fan. There, turn those fans off. Let's make sure we got a good ground. We do. Through the test light, we should have control to that temp sensor. I'll make sure I got a good piercing on it, and I do. I'm well through the insulation. I'm making good contact with it. We'll wiggle it a few times. Yeah, I can see it's touching the copper inside that little hole in the wire, but it's probably still commanding the fans on. Yep. It is not seeing anything from that temp sensor. So normally what we do now is we check all the powers and grounds on the computer to make sure they're all good. Sometimes you can have a bad power or ground and it'll throw this for a loop. I would expect to have more problems, but you never know in the modern vehicles. So what we have to do is go through each of these connectors and look for the powers and grounds and test them all with a test light. Alright, so what I've done is I've gone ahead and hooked up my scan tool. I'm reading -40, which is the open, condition on that temp sensor. I just want to make sure I'm not just going off the fans, because the fans may not kick off right away when it sees a temp sensor come up. So I'm just going to watch that. I'm going to go back in here and re-tap onto this wire. Re-pierce it. There we go. It's changing. It's at 302. So it must not turn those fans off right away. And so if I unhook that, I go back to -40. I hook it back up. 302. So that's good. I'll show you. So there's 302. I'll unhook the test light and she'll go back to -40. I hook it back up and she goes to 302. So that means we have a good computer. That's good. Yeah, some of these newer vehicles, they're not like the older ones where they instantly will see a signal and kick the fans off. They'll still run in this weird mode for a little while to make sure everything's okay and keep the fans on high. So that's telling me that most likely I have a bad wire going down to that temp sensor. So let's start it up and look at the temp gauge in here and see. Now I still have no movement on my temp gauge, but I have 302 here, but no movement on the temp gauge at all. We'll move it back to 40 and we'll put it back to 302. I'm going to go see if that temp gauge has moved at all. Temp gauge still isn't moving. We still have fan power. Okay, this is getting interesting. Okay, so I've got this wire probed on the yellow wire, and we're gonna remove this one from the computer, and now we're going to check for continuity between these two. I'm going to set my meter for continuity mode. Okay, so I'm going to hook to here. I'm going to hook to here. We have continuity. Okay, so that's all good. Now what I want to do is load test it. And so to load test it, I'm just going to go through this test light to a ground. And then I'm going to have to hook that up to a positive. So we'll come here, we're a positive. And then we'll come to here, we'll get our positive. And you can see the test light lights. So that wire is good going all the way down there. Okay. So that is that wire, which definitely affects the temp. What's the other wire on that sensor? Is that a ground or is that a separate wire that's for maybe one feeds the computer the actual temperature, one controls the gauge? I've seen that before on Hyundais. So I'm going to do some more research on the computer and see what those wires actually do on that sensor. So our other orange wire is a low reference voltage wire. So we have one low ref voltage on a tan, and we have yellow, which is the engine sensor signal. Okay, so I am hooked to the tan wire down there with the positive. I have this off the computer, and I'm coming back through my test light to a ground. I successfully load tested that tan wire all the way back to here. So that wire is good. It tells me that I'm probably not getting low ref out of the computer. So we're going to test that next. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and start it up. And we'll see if we get any low reference voltage. We're hooked up. We should get, 5 volts or whatever out of that. We are not. We're just getting some floating weird voltage. Those are millivolts. And I know I'm making a good connection to the wire because I load tested it. So, and I know if I come over here at 12 volts, my meter will read at 14.97 volts, 15 volts. That's pretty high voltage. It's a little higher than it should be. This is a low ref wire that's right beside it, and it's kind of doing the same darn thing. I'm not getting any reference voltage off of it. So I'm getting intake camshaft actuator and exhaust camshaft actuator solenoid. That passed the last cycle, so I'm pretty sure that's where I had that connector unplugged. But what's failed: engine coolant temperature sensor circuit low, circuit high, engine coolant temperature sensor circuit intermittent, engine coolant temperature below thermostat regulating temperature, cooling fan relay, control 1 circuit, and control 2 circuit. That's because I have the relays out. So it's just the engine coolant temperature sensor is what's giving me the headache. So I don't know why I don't have a reference voltage on this gray wire with the black stripe, which is also supposed to be a low ref. And I know from watching scanner danner videos and stuff that low ref, you can have a short on some other sensor in the car that shares that low ref line, and it takes it down. And it's not necessarily the computer that's the problem. Okay, so duh. Low ref is supposed to be a ground, or as close to ground as possible, free from any interference or whatever, where your 5 volt ref is your 5 volts. So this has 5 volt ref and low ref. So these wires are both low ref, which are supposed to be a ground, which means that if I take and my test light go to there, that's a ground. So that low ref's good. Now I'll go back to my other low ref. Which is this tan wire right here. Yeah. Okay. So those low refs are working. They're grounds. So I don't have any temp sensor reading on the dashboard. And I didn't with the temp sensor plugged in. Yeah. But when I take that signal wire to a ground, it changes my reading on my scan tool. It could be that the computer is just saying that's still not a valid signal, right? And so we are not going to do anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear all the codes so the fans shouldn't run. I'm going to put the relays back in, hook the temp sensor back up. I'm going to let it run for a while, and I'm going to watch the scan tool and see if that changes. I don't know. I might be chasing just a foolish thing where it was still running the fans on high and that temp sensor's bad or something, or the gauge is bad on the dash. I don't know. But we're just going to put it all back together now. We're going to clear all the codes, and we're going to see what happens. And then, of course, I'll have to patch these up with some liquid electric tape where I pierced them and clean that all up if it fixes it. But so that we're getting the low ref all the way back to that connector. We're getting signal control. I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird one. Oh my God, Becky. Yeah. Oh man. So I cleared the fault codes out of the computer. The fans were running still from where they run for like 5 minutes after you shut it off. As soon as I cleared the fault codes, the fans stopped. And guess what? As soon as I cleared the fault code, the darn temp sensor started working. It's no longer all the way on cold. What the heck? Okay. Alright, so once it gets that fault code and you have a bad sensor, you've got to clear the codes. Or it does not even, this just stays on cold in here. It still shows it in the computer evidently, but it doesn't reset this as long as that check engine light's on. I mean, after a certain number of dry cycles, I'm sure it would. But that's something to remember on these newer ones, you know. Learn something new every day. I want to automatically search for my VIN. Yes. Okay. Yes. And system selection, engine control module. And so module information, clear fault code, read data stream, actuation test. We're going to read data stream, engine data. Come on. Okay. I want the engine coolant temp sensor. Say okay. There we go. It's at 154. And it's working. So as long as it has fault codes in there, it's not going to stop. I mean, I'm sure after a few drive cycles it probably would clear the fault and then say it's working now, but it still leaves that dead on cold and then kicks the fans on high and leaves the fans on for 5 minutes after you shut it off. So we did have a bad temp sensor. We replaced it, and I expected that things would just straighten up like they would on a 1999, but not so on this 2017. Interesting. So that's good news for the customer. He doesn't have to do anything, right? That's good news. So something to realize. All right, thanks for following me along. You can see what my troubleshooting process was. I'll still put this video up, even though it was just my own stupidity of not clearing the codes. So, okay, I'll talk to y'all later. It's Tommy, Frugal Prepper. Alright, I got everything back together. I had to pull that connector off again, so it threw some more codes. I went ahead and cleared those and put everything back together nice and neat. The fan works fine. The temp sensor is working. The gauge is working. Everything's happy. So it's an important lesson on these newer ones. Gotta clear those codes before the temp gauge will actually give you a reading. How about that? Anyway, sometimes, it's just a learning experience. I work on a lot of older, 90s, 2000s, 2010s cars. I don't work on these newer ones very often, and it's just a learning experience. But I'm glad I took the time to troubleshoot, go through the steps, and not just be like, must have a bad computer, right? Which is what a lot of shops would do. Troubleshoot it, go through the steps, figure it out. And this is really good news for the customer. I'll talk to y'all later. It's Tommy, Frugal Prepper.